welcome and thank you very much for joining us on episode 150 of the Blazers Edge podcast, presented to you today by BlazersEdge.com. I'm your weekend host, Chris Lucia. My normal co-host, Brandon Goldner, is not going to be here this week, but I was able to get Erik Gundersen on the show. He's got a couple of podcasts going right now, so I'm going to throw those links into the show post on BlazersEdge.com. If you want to check those out, you can click through those links and also check him out on Twitter. We're going to have those links on the news post and at the end of this podcast as well. If you want to get a hold of us at Blazers Edge, you can do so at blazersedgepodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can check out this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and now Google Play. And if you feel so inclined, you can give us a like, a review, a subscription, a thumbs up, or whatever on any of those services. We would appreciate that very much. Joining me this week on the Blazers Edge podcast is the most recent addition to the Blazers Edge staff, Erik Gundersen. How's it going, man?
It's going well. It's going okay. You know, it's rainy, but it's Friday, I guess. Which, I mean, yeah. So I'm happy. Happy Festus Day. Happy Festus.
I know it's so we're recording this on Friday the 8th. We have a ton to talk about. Festus Ezeli signing with the Blazers on a crazy contract. Crabbe on an equally crazy contract, I would say, signing in restricted free agency with the Brooklyn Nets. There's going to be Summer League coming up, so maybe we can touch on that at some point. But I want to start, Erik, talking about Festus Ezeli, because everything about what happened to me was just, it was completely came out of nowhere. It was completely the opposite of what 75 to 99% of Blazer fans had anticipated at that point in free agency, if not everybody. So I want to lead with this quote from Festus Ezeli. This is from Casey Holdall of ForwardCenter.net and a story that he wrote. And I want to read this because I think this kind of gives Blazer fans a little bit of insight into the character that Festus Ezeli is. So I'm gonna read this quote here and then we'll go from there. So it says, "First of all, this organization is first class. We played with them in the playoffs, so I'm pretty familiar with them in the West as well. I got to see a lot about the team's character in those moments in battle on the court, and that's where you get to know other teams' strengths and weaknesses. The chemistry was something I really admired on the court. Second thing, the fans. I noticed when we came out here, the fans were unbelievable. We take pride in our fans, and as a basketball player, you love your fans, so when I saw that, I saw the energy, I wanted to be a part of that. Great team, great coach, great fans. What more could you ask for from an organization?" And I'm going to say, Erik, from a first quote from a player after he signs with a team, what more could you ask from a guy? I mean, come on.
Saying all the right things, you know, giving the fans a shout out. Festus, he knows how to play it. I'll give him that much.
So this guy went 4 years, right, to Vanderbilt, the Harvard of the South, if I recall correctly. So smart dude, didn't start playing basketball until high school. AAU level, according to there's a few articles today you should check out if you haven't read them yet. Mike Richmond, the Oregonian, Casey Holdall at ForwardCenter.net has some stories about Festus and his background. But long story short, the guy didn't start playing basketball until he got to the high school level, and he started playing a little bit of AAU. And it wasn't till later on in his AAU career that he started to get noticed by colleges and ended up at Vanderbilt, where he redshirted his first year and then went on to play 4 years and became the 30th pick in the NBA draft in 2012 from the Golden State Warriors. And so he's with the Blazers now. Erik, what are your first impressions of this? What do you want to talk about first? The money, what he brings to the court? I mean, there's so much to talk about with Festus Ezeli signing with the Blazers.
Well, I think the rim protection, obviously, if he's healthy, which is obviously, I think, the biggest question. But if he's healthy, he definitely gives them something that they didn't have, because none of their centers really protected the rim very well. And, when he's healthy, he's pretty solid, aside from these finals, which I think the entire Warriors team really looked discombobulated, especially after, they lost that lead and Draymond got suspended. He really adds something. And at the price, especially with the questions about his health, I don't think you could ignore that, because you look at what other centers got on the market, and you got to be pretty happy with that. And the fact that it's a team option for next year, So if it doesn't work out, if those knees aren't good, if they don't like what they see, they can decline his option and then, use that cap space elsewhere.
So just speculating. I know that Kevin Durant choosing to sign with the Warriors put them in a situation where they had to renounce their restricted free agency rights to Festus, and therefore allowing him to become an unrestricted free agent and sign with the Blazers, just for the cap space that they had, which I believe it's going to be 2 years, 18 million. Is that the total on that?
It's actually 15. It was reported as 16 first by Woj, and then Mark Spears followed up and said it was actually 15 because it's like 7.5 the first year or something like that, and then there's a team option.
Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable deal for the Blazers. And so, Kevin Durant making his decision later on in the free agency process after a lot more of the larger chips had fallen and teams who needed rim protecting centers had signed them. Festus all of a sudden becomes unrestricted, whereas before he was restricted. And I think teams, they were waiting out restricted free agents. We've seen this with the Blazers' own restricted free agents, and Mo Harkless, Myers Leonard, and Alan Crabbe all not signing until, Crabbe was the earliest at 7th, and we haven't, as of recording, we haven't heard anything about Mo Harkless and Myers Leonard. So a restricted free agency that generally takes a little bit longer to fall, but Festus was in a unique situation where he became unrestricted halfway through the process. Other teams had already snatched up the available high dollar, big name center free agent prospects. So was this a result that you think more of the market kind of drying up on the need for a center of his capabilities, or is it more on questions about his health and durability going forward? Do you have any speculation on that?
I think it's both. I think, when you see the Warriors choose to bring back, because they didn't need to, they chose to bring back Sean Livingston and they prioritized him over Ezeli. And so that, and then also the fact that most of the centers, like I would have probably said that Mozgov would have been like a plan, F for the Blazers.
Pretty far down the list.
And he was the first center taken. So, you had so many centers go off the board. And I mean, you looked at the money that these guys got, but then also after that happened, there weren't a whole lot of teams with a ton of cap space because a lot of teams, spent their money early, the teams that knew they weren't going to get Kevin Durant. And so I think it's definitely a mix of both. And I think his performance in the finals was so bad that may have scared some teams off. Like GMs aren't immune to recency bias. And I think I think all of those factors played a part.
How much stock do you put, because I noticed, in some of the comments, talking about the Game 7, and when he was, not playing particularly well against some of the lineups that the Cleveland Cavaliers were able to put out there. I believe some of the small ball lineups were a bit difficult for Festus to handle. What do you make of his performance in the finals? And I know it's kind of screwed up because he got thrown into a starting position that probably would have never happened had there not been, injuries to Bogut and then Draymond Green getting suspended. So it's kind of a interesting situation of events that led him to starting in the finals. So I don't know how much stock I personally put into it. How much do you take out of that?
I mean, he got dominated by Tristan Thompson. I think that was one takeaway, but he did make some impacts against the Blazers. I thought in the Blazers series at times when he was in the finals the year before, he was actually very effective. And I just wonder, I guess my question is did he progress? Because when the Warriors won the finals a couple of years ago, and granted, all the Cavs fans are gonna, have their excuses about not having Kyrie and Love, but they benched Bogut down the stretch of that series in favor of Ezeli because he was more mobile, he was quicker, he could do a little bit more with more mobile guys. And as you said, that wasn't the case in the finals. He really did have a lot of trouble, and all their other big guys outside of Bogut had trouble other than Draymond. And I mean, it did kind of make me a little more skeptical, I guess. And I don't know if maybe he was hurting at that time. I don't know if maybe the summer off will give him a little bit more health, but he's also really never played a lot of big minutes. So I have my questions, but I think you look at his overall body of work and what the Blazers gave him. And I think you do have to give him a chance, especially where the Blazers are. I mean, really, I mean, weren't in a position to get a guy that's like a no doubt game changer. So, I mean, I think they had to do that.
So defensively, Festus brings a big to the middle. He can protect the paint. He can cover much better than any of the Blazers' current personnel in the front court in the pick and roll. He can help. With if the Blazers want to switch on more schemes, he's a bit more mobile. So we know that he is bringing quite a bit to the defensive end, and that's kind of what he was billed as, and that was the hole that I think most Blazer fans saw as the biggest need for the Blazers this offseason. But in terms of the offensive end, what does he really bring other than a huge body to be able to set really great screens? Does he do anything particularly well on the offensive end?
Not. I don't think so. People talk about him catching lobs and stuff like that. Well, like Mason Plumlee can get up, and how many lobs did we really see him, get thrown to him? I don't necessarily. Maybe with Turner and having a third passer, maybe that'll grease the wheels a little bit on the offense. But I mean, Plumlee didn't really get that many lob dunks or whatever. He's a bigger body. He might be able to finish a little bit better on like post touches than I would say Plumlee would, and he can get position, and Davis really can't just because of how skinny he is. So I would say that, just his ability to roll to the rim, like you said, be a big body. I think that's kind of what Stotts mentioned today in the press conference was, kind of being a little bit like Robin Lopez, except without the little baby hook that Robin had. But they're going to give him some touches. They're going to give him a chance. That's the one thing you can always count on the Blazers is that they're going to give those guys a chance. Like when they come here, like it's a pretty, open system. Everyone gets to touch the ball. And, even when Robin Lopez was, surrounded by like 4 amazing offensive players at the time with Wes and Nick and Lamarcus and Damian, they're still going to give him his chances. So he'll get a shot, I think, more so than he did in Golden State. So maybe that'll help.
So ostensibly, Festus is coming in to be the starting center for the Blazers, as far as we can tell. We've heard from Terry Stotts, I believe, in the same in the same press conference you mentioned, that Al-Farouq Aminu is apparently going to be the starter at power forward going forward. So even without the Blazers having had the opportunity to even match on Mo Harkless or Myers Leonard's potential deals, I'm looking at the Blazers front court now. If you have Aminu starting at the power forward position, Ezeli at the 5, you have Ed Davis, Mason Plumlee, all going to need minutes there. Then you have Myers Leonard if they bring him back, Noah Vonleh. I mean, all of these guys are going to need minutes. How is that going to work out for the Blazers?
It's going to be tough because, the Blazers, one of the best things that they've had going for them, I feel like, since Terry Stotts has been there. They've gotten guys to buy in. Obviously, it hasn't gone smoothly for everybody, but, Thomas Robinson comes to mind. Mo Harkless at parts of last year where, Jason Quick had that story that Damian had to, like, text him and make sure that he was okay because he wasn't getting minutes and, like, told him to stick with it or whatever. But there's going to be a lot of those situations in the front court if they bring Myers back. If they bring Myers back, if they bring Harkless back, this is going to be very, and even to think also, we'll get to this later, I'm sure, but Crabbe too, because he played 3 a lot. And so if you look at all these forwards and big guys, there's going to be an odd guy. There's going to be a couple of odd guys out, I feel like, and there's going to be, as much as they can spin it, there's going to be some guys that are unhappy because a lot of these guys, Vonleh aside, they're not kids anymore. They're not just like rooks that are, need to take their lumps and just need to sit on the bench. All these guys are pretty much entering their prime or just outside of entering their prime, or in the middle of it in Davis's case. And so it's going to be complicated. This is just speculation, but I feel like they got to trade one of them.
That's kind of what it looks like. And if you're looking at what Festus does on the offensive end, maybe like you mentioned, being a solid finisher or being able to get up and catch an alley-oop, probably going to be a solid finisher in the pick and roll as well. But, outside of 5 feet, thus far in his career, he hasn't demonstrated the ability to shoot with any range. And that's not anything that anybody really expects from my understanding. So thinking about Plumlee's strengths offensively and Ed Davis's strengths offensively, I think you just have a lot of guys in your front court there that just don't have any ability to stretch the floor. And if you bring back Myers, you have a guy who can stretch the floor. Noah Vonleh as well, if he performs up to what we hope that he can be. You have some guys that can stretch the floor, but that still doesn't alleviate the logjam there. So I don't understand how that works. And unfortunately, you see guys on these contracts that O'Shea was able to get last summer, bringing in Mace still on his rookie deal, signing Ed Davis to that descending deal for that averages like $7 million a year in the cap climate that we're in right now. It's absolutely crazy. And you hate to see any of those kind of deals get traded away.
Yeah, and I guess but that deal, I mean, if you look at this and you look at the guys left on here, Plumlee's going to be a free agent next year. So how much does a team want to give up? Like, and as much as, he was a huge part of their team last year, I felt like Ed Davis was a major part of their attitude. He gave them a lot of backbone. I felt like a little bit more swagger than some of the other guys on the team, just because he was on the Grizzlies, he was on those grit and grind teams, had been in wars with them. But you look at the contract situation, and he has definitely the contract that I'm sure would be most attractive to other teams. I don't know what that gets you. I don't know what they're looking for, but I mean, I think Davis has the most tradable contract, but maybe a team wants to look at Plumlee. I don't know, and I think the main takeaway that a lot of people have is like the more years you have on your deal, the better. So I guess if Portland has to trade one of them, it would be Davis, especially if they keep everyone, which I think that they will keep Myers at least for a year, but then they can't really trade him until December 15th because he was a free agent, and people know he wants to get paid. So, next year if he takes the qualifying offer. And yeah, they got an issue here because Ezeli does improve them, but I feel like somebody might have to go, like you said. I mean, there's such a long jam here. I don't know how they alleviate it. And Vonleh, I feel like they still need to hope with Vonleh,
Yeah, well, it's going to be hope. I mean, we're coming up on, Summer League's going to be starting this weekend, so we'll see if he's made some major improvements. But he looked like he was pretty far away from being, a very regular, consistent contributor to the Blazers. At least, being, I guess he was a decent, fifth option on offense. But I don't think that's really what you're looking for out of Noah Vonleh, right?
I mean, not necessarily. I think, what you hope he gets to is like a playmaking small ball five with his length, in limited time, obviously last year, and he didn't play for like the last, little bit of the season, but his rim protection numbers were actually better than all of their other big men. According to Nylon Calculus, his allowed field goal percentage was lower than Myers and Mason and Ed, and he's a great ball handler for his size. I remember last year, when I was on the beat, there were guys on the team that were on the staff that said he probably had the second best handles other than CJ on the team, and he's almost 7 feet tall, and he's big, he's strong, he can get. He's a pretty decent rebounder, but it's just like that jumper. Does he have confidence in it? That to me is the biggest step. Is he's so young. He's in that stage where like he hasn't really, I don't think he senses the urgency yet, and so you got to hope that happens. And I mean, I think he could project to be really, really good. I mean, his package of skills is like that's what you want in the modern NBA. Like it's like the perfect package, but it's just like And with all this logjam, like, does he even see time to get a chance to improve?
I'm hoping in Summer League that Vonleh is one of those guys who takes, that experience. I think he started 61 games for the Blazers. So this past season, I hope he takes that experience, with the starters, all that playing time on an NBA court with NBA players, and takes kind of a leadership role in summer league, kind of much the same way that Alan Crabbe did last summer, and kind of showed that he was ready to take that next step. With his performance in summer league, I don't expect Noah to take that monster of a step as Alan Crabbe did, because frankly, I don't even think there's the room on the court for that to happen, as we mentioned earlier. But I would just like to see him show some tangible improvements on his regular season performance. But we were talking about this front court, and it makes me wonder. Al Farouk starting, all these other guys we mentioned. If Mo Harkless gets a solid offer from another team, you already have Evan Turner committed to being the starter at the 3, Aminu committed to being the starter at 4, and all those other guys who can play backup power forward as well. If Alan Crabbe gets matched, I guess the question is, does this come down to Maurice Harkless valuing the versatility of Mo Harkless versus what Alan Crabbe brings to the table?
I guess. I think for me, I would definitely. I don't know what Mo's gonna get, but like I just think that Crabbe. You look at all these forwards now, or all these wings with the Blazers outside of CJ and Dame. You need space for them, and I think Mo just doesn't provide that. And I think Mo was a great asset to the Blazers last year. I think him and Farouk together could guard pretty much anybody, and that was huge for them. But it just, do you believe that he'll be able to knock down shots and in situations like, Crabbe, I don't think is like the greatest creator in the world, but he can get to his jumper. He can get to his mid-range spot from like 17 feet or whatever and knock it down. And Harkless doesn't really have that. Like his game is more like offensive rebound, crash the glass, backdoor cut. And I don't know if you necessarily, if that's more important than having a little extra space on the court. I think especially if, Myers isn't going to play a lot. It's tough. It's a tough call, but I think for me, I would choose Crabbe.
So if Neil brings back Crabbe, then you have CJ is obviously your starter in the backcourt next to Damian Lillard. And then we know Evan Turner was already promised that starting spot when he signed his 4-year, $70 million contract with the Blazers. So I don't know, you're signing Alan Crabbe, and he's got that. What is his original deal to be reported at? It's 4 years, 70 with
4 years, 75. So a little bit more. That's his base salary, and then with incentives, it could get up to 83.
So there's that very, very player friendly deal that he signed with the Nets, where they said there's a 15% trade kicker. So if a team that's if any team that has him tries to sign him, or tries to trade him rather, his contract increases by 15% there. And he's got that 4th-year player option. I mean, this is a deal where the Nets just basically dared the Blazers to match, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is like, all right, guys, well, you've told everybody, because that was the thing that every, national reporter had said, was that they're gonna match Crabbe, and they're basically just trying to call their bluff right now.
And, Damian Lillard, he's going to be making, starting this season, $25 million for the next 5 years. CJ, he's going to be coming up for his extension. They can start negotiating that, and I believe they can agree on something by October 31st on his extension, which is likely to be close to the max. Evan Turner signing for 4 years, $70 million. Crabbe signing this offer sheet that's 4 years, $75 million. That's a ton of money locked up into that backcourt there, and I know that a couple of those guys can play, small forward as well a little bit, Turner and Crabbe. But I just don't see how this works out long term with all the money that's going to need to go to all those guys.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems pretty clear that that Paul Allen has given the Blazers the green light to go into the luxury tax. And yeah, it is going to be complicated because, like you said, CJ's extension, whether it happens before the 31st or it happens next summer where they sign into the max, that's definitely, you have to think about that. And I guess that just makes the Turner deal a little bit more confusing for me, because if I had to choose, I would say give me Crabbe over Turner, especially he's 3 years younger. I think he has a little bit more room to grow and evolve. Whereas, I don't want to say Turner is what he is, but he's 27. Like, I don't know how much better he can get. And so they have they're going to have another complicated situation here. It's, I guess this situation is more money than it is people, like the front court is.
So I'm wondering here, if the restricted free agents here, you have Alan Crabbe, Mo Harkless, Myers Leonard. If all those guys were to get matched by the Blazers, that would be all 15 roster spots. We saw Cliff Alexander actually had to get waived in order for the Blazers to bring in Festus Ezeli, but you can see Cliff on the Summer League squad. So still in a Blazers uniform this summer, at least.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think anybody's going to pick him up off waivers, but I think that's the only like barrier to the Blazers having him on the Summer League squad.
So the Blazers won't have, if they match on all their guys, they won't have a roster spot. And if they did want to open a roster spot, you'd have to be thinking they'd be waiving someone like Montero, unless for some reason they wanted to throw in the towel this early on a guy like Connaughton.
Nah, they're not going to get rid of Connaughton.
And they seem very high on Montero as well. So I guess my question to you, Eric, is if the Blazers weren't, suppose they didn't sign on a match on one of the three restricted free agents, or they decided to waive Montero and open a roster spot. Let's assume the Blazers had a roster spot open this summer to bring in a guy. I think, looking at this team, who's the actual, veteran, legitimate, like locker room veteran presence? Is there anybody on this team who's older than 28?
I not necessarily in age. I guess I would have to say that if they don't move him, that Ed Davis kind of fills that role. I feel like he was kind of in that role. I mean, he had one of the corner lockers last year because he was one of the most veteran guys on the team outside of Kaman. I feel like he would probably step into that role. I mean, he's still kind of young. He's under 30, but they could look for a guy like that for sure. And, it always helps to have, an old vet there. But I think, Davis has bounced around the league so much that he has like a pretty good perspective on like what it means to be an NBA player. I mean, he was in Toronto and then he was in Memphis and then he was with the Lakers, and like the Lakers kind of like the first time he really played. And then this year he, got minutes, and I think Ed can fill that void, so long as they don't move him. But as we said, he probably has the most attractive deal for teams.
Do you think the Blazers going forward would be comfortable with not having, that sage old vet locker room presence like they had from Kaman the last couple of years, like they've had from Steve Blake in past years? I mean, it seems to be when you have a team this young, you at least find, some guy at the very end of his career, some journeyman, sign him to a veteran's minimum. Maybe he's not going to play at all, just to have that locker room presence. And it's hard to see Neil Olshey, how much he values culture, not, bringing in someone, just maybe a Tayshaun Prince, for example, someone at the very end of their career who's probably not going to contribute a whole lot on the court, but is considered, the consummate professional.
Mm-hmm.
Someone like that. I mean, I don't know if I could see Neil Olshey going into the fall without at least, bringing in a guy like that.
That is that's a trademark of all of Neil's rosters for sure. You got, think about Earl Watson and Ronnie Price, even guys like that who, are still around the league, and, last year they had, guys that were professionals, younger professionals like Gerald Henderson, who was a really good locker room guy. And I think Kaman was also a pretty good guy to have around for them as well last year. But I do think I think Davis is ready for a role like that. But that I guess I take a guy like Tayshaun Prince, makes sense as well. If they have a roster spot available, I guess it just depends on how much they like what they see from Montero in Summer League. A lot of players were really they had really talked a lot about how much Montero had improved over the course of the year, even though he didn't play and really only had like a D-League stint with the Santa Cruz Warriors with Alexander. But, they weren't really saying all those really nice things about Alexander. They were saying them more so about Montero, and maybe it was a sign of where Montero was after, not even really playing basketball, organized basketball for a year before he came to the Blazers. Yeah, but it would be, that you make a great point that would be very different of Olshey. But I do think that even though Ed Davis is young, I think he's been through so much in his career that I think he's the kind of guy that you would want for that role.
I think they'll be, if they go into the fall with the current roster as it stands, matching all those guys, I think they'll be all right. And, you have to consider they have the leadership from a guy like Dame as well. You have. I saw a stat. I think it was from Tara, Team Mom from Blazers Edge, said there were 7 players on the Blazers who went to college for 4 years, and there's another 3 who had gone for 3 years or something like that. So I mean, this is, even though a lot of the guys are young, I mean they definitely have a great deal of experience, and this seems to be something that Olshey places a premium on, it is guys that kind of value that, that professionalism, I should say. I mean, you look at CJ McCollum and the way he composes himself as well, and the things that he's doing nationally. I mean, that's obviously something that the Blazers look at and they value, and I think they'll be all right. But I have one question here. It was actually sent to our own Dave Deckard, managing editor of Blazers Edge. In his mailbag, you can send those questions to blazersub@gmail.com. And I want to wrap by discussing this because it brings up a fairly valid point as we're sitting here on a Friday night with the Blazers having until, I believe, Sunday afternoon to match on Crabbe's contract. So I'll bring up the question here. With limited picks, trade assets, and cap space moving forward, should the Blazers consider matching the Crabbe offer, making him the starter at shooting guard, and seeing what they can get on the trade market for CJ? And that comes from Greg and Dave's blazersub@gmail.com mailbag. So, Eric, last question here. CJ McCollum, trade market, matching on Crabbe, putting him in at starter, having a backcourt rotation, 3-guard rotation of Dame, Alan Crabbe, and Evan Turner. How does that tickle your fancy?
I wrote a column last year for the Columbian during the season that I thought they shouldn't break up CJ and Dame. And for me, unless the return is truly, a star player who's going to help them, I don't think you can really do that, because what CJ does is harder to replace than what Crabbe does or Turner does, in that there's always not just a shot creator, but an elite shot creator, both for himself and teammates, on the court at all times. And I think that that's super, super valuable. And I think that that would be really hard to replace unless you got like a truly bona fide star in return. And I think, if that happens, maybe the move is, I don't think they can trade. I know he has a trade kicker, and I know they can't trade Turner until December 15th. And I think the other thing with Crabbe is that I'm pretty sure that this is correct, because I think I saw this talked about with Cantor. When you match an offer sheet for a restricted free agent, you can't trade them for a full year after you matched. So they could run it back for a year, and Crabbe would still have 3 years left on his deal if they decide to trade him later. I think that you try and keep CJ at all costs unless an actual star becomes available that, really helps you in an area that I just think you want a player that is of equal footing as McCollum, because McCollum is really, really good. And I just don't, I think that's just me. I wouldn't do it. So I think maybe eat the tax or whatever for a year before you get to that repeater tax, and then maybe look at trading after all that happens is what I would do.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. If we're considering where the cap is where it is now and where it's gonna be in the future, the contracts, that extension that CJ is in all likelihood to sign, the offer sheet Crabbe signed, and Turner's contract, those in the cap climate of today and the future, those are likely to be traded. I mean, if they're worth that kind of money on the open market now, I'd be surprised if down the road Neil wouldn't be able to find a suitor, for one of those guys, should he have to clear up some room in the backcourt. But that's going to be all we have for this week's Blazers Edge Weekend podcast. Before we get out of here, Erik, I want to give you another opportunity to talk about some of the podcasts that you got going on, because you're a pretty busy guy right now with the podcast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I do the Bulls versus Blazers podcast, at least once a week with my buddy Sean Hyken out in Chicago. He's at Summer League right now, so I don't know how much we're going to record right now while he's out there, but I'm starting a new podcast. I just started it on Thursday, was our first episode, July 7th. It's called Locked On Blazers. David Locke, the radio play-by-play guy of the Utah Jazz, started this network with the Locked On Jazz podcast and the Locked On NBA podcast. And as of right now, we have 17 NBA teams with their own, podcast, which we're going to be producing stuff daily for you on there. We're not on iTunes yet, but we will be soon. Right now it's run through the Audio Boom network. You can find it on my Twitter page at Erik_Gundersen, or you could search, Locked On Blazers on audioboom.com. It's a podcast hosting website, but we're going to be on iTunes soon. There's RSS feeds if you are an Android user, and we're going to have podcasts every day. Some might be shorter than others, but most of them aren't going to go over like 30 minutes. So, we're just going to have, fresh content churning out, hopefully on a daily basis to do Blazers stuff. So that just started on Thursday. We're on Audio Boom right now. Locked On Blazers. I just did an episode again earlier today. So, and I'll do another one tomorrow and through the weekend. So Locked On Blazers. Thanks, Chris, for giving me a chance to shout that out. But Locked On Blazers, look for it on iTunes in a few days when it gets up there, and you can listen to it right now on Audio Boom. So yeah, check it out. Thanks.
Definitely check that out, because doing a weekly podcast, I know from experience, is a pretty solid undertaking. Even if you have a couple guys doing it, for you to do the Bulls vs. Blazers podcast a few times a week and then tacking on a daily freaking podcast, that's super ambitious. So I think the Blazers Edge listeners should do you a solid and check that out if they get the opportunity. Erik, thanks again for coming on, man. You're welcome back anytime.
Appreciate it, Chris. We'll have to have you on Locked On Blazers.
And that'll do it on episode 150 of the Blazers Edge podcast. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this week. I'd also like to thank Blazers Edge staff writer Erik Gundersen for coming on the show. If you like the intro and outro music for this week's episode, that was performed by local beatmaker and producer Odar. You can hear more of his beats at soundcloud.com/OdarBeats. Make sure and tune in to the Blazers Edge podcast next week, where you can hear Dave Deckard and Dan Marang. I'm Chris Lucia, and I'll be back with Brandon Goldner next weekend.